Okay, we're back, we're live, 11 o'clock rock. Research in Manoa, we have scientists. Be careful, we have scientists among us. Okay, we have Bob Richmond, Director of the Kewalo Marine Laboratory, Pacific Biosciences Research Center of SOEST, UH Manoa, and Ruth Gates, Director of the Hawaiian Institute of Marine Biology at UH Manoa, and Mark Hickson, Professor of Marine Biology at the Biology Department of UH Manoa. All three different places, but all collaborating. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
Great to have you here. We're going to talk about reefs today, and that's caring about coral. Good title. Just to say that I went to the science fair, as I do every year, with camera, and we took pictures of all those kids with their posters. You know, and I have learned that the posters they have at the science fair are just like the posters they have all around the world at science conferences. So it's the same thing. We want to, promote those kids. We want them out there. We want to have some of them here at this table. We want them to talk about a lot of their projects included coral reefs because they're local and they relate to that and they know it's important. And so maybe if we waited for 15, 20 years, you would have a public that fully understands the problem.
Fantastic.
They're coming up little by little, from the 6th grade on up at the science fair. Anyway, so let's talk about the symposium first, because that's really critically important. I mean, Hawaii is a center for science, earth, ocean science, and you guys are participating against your will. Tell us about it.
Okay, well, we're going to be hosting the 13th International Coral Reef Symposium. So the Coral Reef Symposia are the largest coral reef meetings in the world, held every 4 years, so we got lucky number 13. And so they've been going on just under 50 years, and this will be the first time it'll be in Hawaii, and likely the last time because it rotates among 70 nations. There are 70 nations represented. So this will also be the biggest ever. We estimate at the moment over 2,500 people. We've had over 2,300 abstracts submitted, meaning for presentations, both oral and poster.
Posters.
Yep, we have 90 different sessions going on. We had to wean that down from over 180 sessions that were proposed.
Wow.
And we really do expect this to be a gathering not only of scientists, but what has traditionally been a purely scientific meeting. The theme of this one is bridging science to policy. And the idea behind it is that science to management's gone pretty well. We have a lot of managers that are very good scientists and a lot of scientists that are doing management. But we really feel as a community that we haven't really done as good a job bringing the science to the policy realm. And
when you say policy, you mean politicians?
Politicians, leaders. Again, this is very much a Pacific Island event, not just Hawaii, where we have traditional leadership, so a lot of chiefs. We have women's groups. So unique to this symposium, we're actually putting on a leader summit to bring leaders to participate and to address the real disconnect that we've all talked about. We did a Google Scholar search this morning. In 2015 and 2016, there were over 15,000 publications or references to coral reefs in the scientific realm. So knowledge is going up exponentially.
Yeah.
And during the same period of time, coral reefs are going down.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to address that disconnect of how can we do a better job of not only doing good science, but making the science relevant and putting it to good use. So in part of building a bridge should be two ways, is to bring leaders together, elected leaders, traditional leaders, people in government, to try to find a way to bring the science to them in a more usable way, and open up a discussion too to put science in a supporting role. Decision makers have to make decisions. Scientists like ourselves are usually focused in on the what. What's the effect of sedimentation? What's the effect of climate change? Leaders are really concerned about why. Why should we be concerned about this? Why should we invest resources? What should we do about it there? So as a group, we decided to take this on in Hawaii because we really, really need to address coral reef health in Hawaii.
What are you doing with your spare time lately, Bob?
Not much. I had a full head of hair when I started about a year ago, and you can see where I am now. So fortunately, I've got great colleagues here, Dr. Ruth Gates, who's the president of the Sanctioning Society, Mark Hickson, who we make up 3/4 of the executive committee. And as a group, we decided that this was really important to bring to Hawaii and also to really work on how we can take good knowledge. Policymakers can't make good decisions without good knowledge. Our role is to really make sure they have the best available science and in a form and format they can use.
Fabulous. So Ruth, what part of what Bob just said do you agree with?
Absolutely everything, Jay. But I would like to point out that I'm obviously the slacker of the group because I've still got hair. I think that Bob has really sort of framed the problem really well. And I'd add one point that, you know, you alluded to straight off the bat, which is we aren't really translating our science very well to people. And this much broader community, you talked about high school students, you know, doing science fairs, they're definitely getting more knowledge. But just the everyday person on the street, why should everybody care about their reef? What is it about the reef that is important to you? And I think that this conference creates an opportunity to have that much broader dialogue and also to take the key messages from the conference and translate them into products that can be put out to everybody here in Hawaii and globally. And so this conference, I think, is marking a slight shift in the way that this particular conference has been run in the past, which has really been about just one or two communities coming together, the scientists talking to the managers, or the scientists talking about their work with conservation professionals. This particular conference is really sort of, I think, platforming on, you know, Oahu as a gathering place. We're really a melting pot of people and problems. And we are really now broadening the purview of our conference and talking across many different audiences and stakeholder groups and inviting people to come and hear what we have to say, to really understand what the problems are facing reefs and what we can do about it.
I imagine that you agree with most of what Ruth said.
I completely agree with everything, not only what Ruth said, but also Bob.
Okay.
And we didn't organize this ahead of
No,
time.
no, it's an unrehearsed show.
Completely unrehearsed, yes.
Well, this is going to be big, and it's really too bad that you have to go rotating around 70 countries because we won't be alive when it happens next time. This is like APEC, you know, the Asia Pacific Economic Summit thing, but 3-4 years ago. We get one shot in 21. We won't come back here for 21 years. Too bad, because Hawaii is the perfect place for it, in that we have the reefs, and we really better get used to that. But I think a lot of this is accelerated. You know, the whole thing is escalated by climate change, isn't it? The reefs are deteriorating more quickly, and thus the scientific community is seeing that and coming together over that issue, right? Isn't that what's happening?
Yeah, so we have, you know, the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force, which is one of the bodies in which we engage, identified 3 of the major concerns about coral reefs. Certainly climate change is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. 2 is land-based source of pollution, and Hawaii is kind of the rogues gallery of how not to treat land when you're adjacent to a coral reef. And the 3rd one is overfishing, and maybe Mark can talk to that because that's really important in the entire dynamic. So when you take a look at those 3, climate change people are very well aware of, and we've seen the brown water events here, these ridiculous concrete runways between the mountains and the sea. But Mark maybe can talk a little bit about the fisheries, which is such a key part of it all.
Well, let's talk about, which one would you like to talk about first, the fisheries?
Well, first talking about fish, the important thing about climate change is we know the reefs are going to be getting hit by ocean warming, ocean acidification, bleaching events. They're going to get hit pretty hard.
When you say hit, you mean killed?
Potentially killed or at least severely stressed. So what the scientists want to do is develop ways of ensuring that the reefs bounce back, that the reefs will be okay in the long run. Where fisheries and fish come into that are the fish that eat seaweeds and the sea urchins that eat seaweeds. They're the ones that keep the space clean on the reefs so that corals can settle and thrive and grow. So you can have all the best corals in the world settling into a place, but if there's no place for them to live because it's overloaded with seaweed or sediment, they're not going to recover. So everything's connected. That's if coral reefs teach us one thing, it's that everything is connected. So the choices of fish we choose to take out of the ocean can overall affect the entire coral reef ecosystem.
If we don't have coral reefs, if they decline, how does that affect the fish?
Well, the reef is where the fish live. It provides their habitat, it provides their food sources, it provides their shelter. It's been very well shown that with a decline in a coral reef, the fish go away.
Can you talk about the decline of fish and fisheries in the world today?
Well, there's severe overfishing in many parts of the world, and one thing I've noticed just here in Oahu, I lived here 35 years ago, and at that time, you could see pretty good-sized parrotfish on our reefs. Parrotfish are incredibly important for keeping the reef clean so corals can thrive. I came back 3 years ago, and I can't find parrotfish bigger than about this unless I go into a marine reserve or go into very deep water, but there's not that much habitat in deep water. So it's very clear that there's been overfishing on this island and certainly some of the other islands, and it's very well documented. So we're losing those herbivores, those seaweed eaters. And without those seaweed eaters, we're set up for disaster if something happens to our reefs. Even if we're trying to transplant new corals out, they won't grow unless all that seaweed's kept away.
Is there a connection between what you're describing in the reefs and the fish and open ocean aquaculture, which Hawaii has a sputtering start going?
Well, that's a big can of worms. Open ocean aquaculture focuses primarily on predatory fish, things like tuna. They've done some here with some other species, but they don't tend to be reef fishes. They tend to be open water species. So it's
It's a different ballgame.
different ball game, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about the runoffs for a minute. Ruth, can you address that? How does that happen? Why are we allowing it to happen? And what is it doing to the reefs?
It is happening, and it is happening more frequently in more places. And so, first of all, the proximity of humans to where the coral reef is, usually they're very close. If you look at any Pacific island, you'll see this beautiful white ring around an aerial shot of an island. That is the coral reef right there adjacent to the land. And anything we do on land influences the coral reef health. And the things that we do that influences them are we put fertilizers all over our golf courses, and then we do things in the water that pollute the water. We'll often let things run down the drain that just end up directly on the reef. And I think perhaps the most complex problem is the fact that we've laid a lot of concrete and we've controlled how water percolates through the land during a storm. And instead of it literally hitting the land and sinking in and gradually percolating into our coastal waters where the reef is, we have it all channeled into a single place that we now push into a bay. And you can see these huge plumes of pollutants and sediments being washed into the bay at that point. And that's just untenable. Corals love the light. They need the light to live. And so anything that disturbs the water quality, that is the way that light penetrates, is very disruptive to the biology. And of course, the more we develop our land for people, and let's face it, our human population is increasing by leaps and bounds. We need more places for people, then these pressures become more intense on the coastal ecosystem. And so it's a profound problem, but it's actually one of the problems that we can act to solve. We can change the way that we as humans interact with our local waters and make dramatic improvements in this realm.
Talking about the runoff now for a minute. Yeah. If I were naive about this, I would say, well, you have a state that used to have a couple of 100,000 after everybody died off from, the diseases of the 19th century. And now it's got, 1.3 million, and it's a modern state with all kinds of technology, transportation, energy generation, garbage, all that stuff happens. And is it a fair thing for me to say that with the increase in population, you have to have runoff? That there's no way to really avoid runoff in a modern 21st century, complex, highly populated island state?
So I'm going to say no to that. I don't think we have to, and I'm going to turn it over to Bob, who will speak about it in more detail.
So,
he's ready.
This is one of the areas where we do a lot of work, both in our lab and in collaboration, is we have a number of sites set up in Mauna Bay, so right over by Hawaii Kai Port Lock. And that's a classic example of exactly what you asked about. So there, in the late 40s and early 50s, there were about 50 houses within one of the main watersheds there, Kuli'o. So if you look at Mauna Bay, there are 9 sub-watersheds, areas with ridges that are very well defined. And now there are 60,000 people living in an area where there used to be just a few hundred. Yeah. And so during one storm back in 2008, we had a major rainstorm. My buddies and I were actually going up to Waianae to talk with some school kids, and we couldn't get there because the road was washed out. So what do you do as a scientist? Run over and check your gear. That's measuring sedimentation. We had 20 tons of sediment go out to the second marker buoy outside of the Hawaii Kai Marina in a 6-hour period of time. 20 tons of sediment come running down those concrete runways. No coral reef can handle that.
Qu'est-ce que c'est sediment?
Sediment.
Wait. Alexa, what is sediment?
The term sentiment has two distinct meanings.
As a noun, 1, tender, romantic, or nostalgic feeling or emotion. 2, a personal belief or judgment that is not founded on proof or certainty.
Alexa, thank you.
Don't mention it.
There we go. We won't. The sediment we're talking about really is, yeah, I'll answer that.
That's great.
You know, the weathering of earth materials, rocks and everything else comes up with small
Hilarious.
particles of rock, and other things can be what we call the inorganic sediment, which is rocks breaking down due to weathering and erosion. And then you have the organic portion of it that Ruth alluded to too, with all these activities with fertilizers and pesticides and everything else coming down. It's often been said, well, these agrochemicals will adhere to organic material, so don't worry about it. But if the organic material gets eroded off the land and ends up in the ocean, guess what? That's where the chemicals are as well. And what we've seen is that in answer to your most fundamental question, can we do anything about it? I agree completely with what Ruth said. These are human behaviors, and when we talk about managing coral reefs, we're not managing corals, we're not managing fish, we're managing human behaviors responsible for their demise. And in this case, it's these engineering of these ridiculous concrete runways. Instead of having meanders and streams and rivers that actually trap sediment, we're accelerating, and the two things that really determine how much stuff sediment can come off the land is the volume of water coming down and the velocity. And when you have these concrete runways from the mountains to the sea, you know, in Hawaii, we know the ahupua'a are the distinct delineations of land within watersheds from land to sea. The distance between ridge to reef is very short. And when you accelerate this movement of material, we have boulders this size come rolling down these concrete runways, that how in the world can you control the quality of the water? And again, I completely agree with Ruth said, water quality and bottom quality really are setting the stage. Mark made a very important point that the fish are the lawnmowers that mow the lawns so that there's space for new larvae to settle and new individuals. And Ruth's point about water quality really runs the show. The two things that allow coral reefs to persist is their ability to reproduce, form new individuals, and for what we call the larvae, the coral seed, to be able to find a place to settle and become part of the reef. When we pollute the water, when we bury the bottom with sediment, the entire process of reef regeneration is lost. Reefs are vital, and they can come back when you reduce the insults, and that's what coral reef management is about, is ensuring, and that's why we want the symposium here, so we can really spread the world not on only the best science and the most modern science, but putting it into the scientific realm, to policy realm, and community education to say we can do much better. And we don't need a lot of new science, we need to just apply what we already know.
Well, you know, again, to the naive person, why don't we just make channels and focus all the sediment and all the schmutz, yeah, I use that term, all the schmutz that comes down into the ocean at certain intervals, okay, and make, you're gonna love this part, make concrete runways. So it shoots it out into the ocean, you know, beyond the reef. And that way, you know, just keep it separate from the reef and preserve the reef, you know, by not doing that where we want to preserve the reef. Only in these channels we let the sediment come.
Let me have the first cut, and then I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleagues. Again, the issue, people don't realize there are things called mesophotic reefs that are actually outside of the coastal reefs. And these things are living right on the edge in terms of light. So if you just go ahead and dump the stuff and run it into the ocean, but a little bit further out, you're going to be destroying another coral reef ecosystem that's really valuable, the mesophotic reefs. The issue, and hopefully Ruth will be talking about the climate change piece, is that in a world of climate change, if we go with that 2 degree, a lot of people, yeah, you know, maybe that's a conservative estimate. A 2 degree increase in temperature moves up the condensation point for our clouds. So instead of hitting the Kewalo Mountains, they're going to go 600 feet above. That's going to cut our rainfall down. And so we're taking water, which is an asset, and turning it into a liability. We're basically turning it into a reef killer. What we should be doing is every time they dig up a road, Kalanianiole Highway, I've never seen the Kalanianiole Highway when it wasn't dug up somewhere. Every inch of roadway, every inch of those concrete runways should have underground cisterns. You capture the water, you capture the sediment and ponding basins and retention. The sediment is good fertile soil for agriculture. It can be used for construction, and you trap the water for distribution to Waikiki, to the farms on the leeward coast, to people's use, because in the future we are going to be looking for water, and doing reverse osmosis isn't going to work. So there are solutions that are economically feasible.
I hope you're making notes on this. This is important stuff. and also planning to come to the symposium.
Maybe.
We're going to take a short break. When we get back, we're going to talk about more solutions, but also the 800-pound gorilla. We'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Justina Spiritu, and I'm the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and you can catch us every Thursday at 4 p.m. at thinktechhawaii.com. What do we talk about, Matt?
So on Hawaii Farmers Series, we're going to be bringing on the farmers and also supporter of farmers, including restaurants, caterers, as well as government supporters and nonprofits to hear their background stories and understanding our local ag community just a little bit better.
Yeah, essentially, there's a lot more that goes into farming and the local food community beyond just producing the food. And we want to feature and get the background story on all these folks and see how we all work together as a community. So join us every Thursday. Aloha.
It's just not being
Okay,
applied.
we came back. We're back with Bob Richmond and Ruth Gates and Mark Hickson, all talking about the symposium coming soon about coral reefs. That's why we're calling this show Caring About the Coral. So let's see, let's capture what you guys were talking about during the break, because the break's the break show. Some say the breaks are the best part of the show. Mark, did you have something?
Well, yeah.
What do you do?
This problem with the sediment, and let's run it all out on these major concourses spread throughout the coastline. Nature does these wonderful things for us, these wonderful ecosystem services, and if we retain our watersheds in a reasonably natural state, it all takes care of itself. So it's even less expensive to do it that way than to always go for this high-tech solution where we think we can play God with nature. We can't. So that was my piece.
Yeah. And
Well,
Ruth, you were talking about porous materials that we
yes.
have in our technology which we're not using.
Absolutely, and that that it's a cost. It's usually a decision that's based on cost. But then, I think that the really interesting thing is to think about the value of the reef itself, and just how much money economically is tied into the critical services that reef provide, and those are, we've already talked about food. Arguably 25% of biodiversity in the ocean spends some time on a coral reef. And some of those things end up on our plate. And that's critical to us. For coastal security, that coral out there that has a crashing white wave over it, has a crashing white wave because a huge amount of energy has come at the reef and the structure itself has stopped that energy. And in doing so, it protects the land masses behind it. So it protects it and stops it from being eroded. When the reef disappears,
You get erosion.
all of that coastal, and the land
Is that
disappears.
what's happening in Waikiki?
There are places in Waikiki that look, the combination of sea level rise and now, a lack of structure offshore are starting to be very eroded, same on the North Shore. So we see that happening, we see that playing out all over the Pacific. And lastly, of course, here in Hawaii, tourism. People come to see the reef, and it is an incredible draw. Our natural resources here in Hawaii are so much the draw and lure for so many people from all over the world. And that translates into hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And Bob, I think you had some figures that from a recent study. Can you just...
So 2 figures, exactly what Ruth was saying. There was an economic study evaluation of Hawaii's reefs. The value is considered $363 million a year in revenue generated from reef and reef resources, and $9.7 billion in the ecosystem services that Ruth just said.
Incredible.
Hanauma Bay, is that an example of a reef system that has been protected? Is it being protected? Because certainly tourists love that one.
Yeah, it's one of our, it's sort of the main marine reserve we have on this island.
Yeah.
And all anyone has to do is go snorkeling or scuba diving in Hanauma Bay and then outside the bay to see the incredible difference. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
I'm doing a project there now, and it's so delightful to see a reef on this island in a reasonably healthy state with nice big fish, and everything seems to be working in that one little tiny area. But it's certainly not enough to conserve the whole island.
Before we get to the gorilla, which I think we have to get to,
Yeah.
I just want to tell you a series of thoughts I've had about this. It was an article in the paper, an op-ed piece maybe a week ago, by a woman in the Army. It was really interesting. And she said, I don't understand why we have all these environmental protests going on, and the public is very interested in environmental issues, you know, frequently as a way to stop progress or development of any kind. At the same time, you drive down the road and people throwing trash out the window. What's the disconnect on that? And this is not a clean state in terms of public spaces. People throw trash. And you say, well, what is it between, you know, really caring about the environment, and then, you know, conducting your own behavior in a way to demonstrate that you care about the environment? Well, I think that's an interesting phenomenon, certainly worth writing the op-ed piece. But it goes to another level. If we care about the environment, we have to spend the money.
That's right.
To do it right. And we have to make sure that everything comports with the latest, you know, scientific approach about how you protect the environment. Yeah. And we're not really doing that. The same thing that throwing the trash out the window is doing on a consumer level is really happening on a higher level. That's why you're talking about policy, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's where, again, you know, I think Mark's point is very valuable, that, you know, a lot of this stuff is really common sense. You don't need reams of research to say whatever you do on land today is going to affect the ocean tomorrow. It's just common sense. You can see it every day driving over the Pali, the Like. It's there, the brown water events. Same thing that he's saying about the fish, and Ruth as well, that many of these things don't require high tech. What they require is a change in human behaviors. And that's part of the reason why we took on the symposium with a lot of opportunity to not just engage the scientific community and the policymakers, but we have teachers that are involved. We have people that are using art and music as communication tools, because sometimes a lecture from a scientist doesn't quite resonate with the community. And that's what we have to learn, is to be better communicators. The three of us have all been given formal training to say, don't do that. Don't use the target. And so we're trying. We're still trying. But the idea there is a symposium should be, what Ruth said, a gathering of people. But it's not just a gathering of people to get together and talk story and share with each other. We have a responsibility to make sure that the knowledge we're generating is broadly applicable. And that's why we're trying to make this very important to Hawaii and to the broader community by inviting stakeholders, fishers, and stakeholders that are involved in everything from tourism to the casual family that goes to use the beach on the weekend, to the teachers that are teaching our kids, who are the best policers, to say, Mom, Dad, don't throw the garbage out the window.
They should grow up quickly.
Yeah, you get a 5-year-old on a mission and no adult's going to win that argument.
Right.
So you wire up the kids, and we have a lot of things that are targeted for K through 12 as well.
Yeah. So, but
I want to kind of add to what Bob
please.
said.
And if you disagree with him, let me know.
It's hard to
Don't be
disagree with
ridiculous.
Bob or Ruth. But this thing about, I'll actually disagree a little bit with you.
Please.
So yes, people do throw stuff out the window. When I lived here 35 years ago, people were throwing stuff out the window way more frequently.
Okay.
There was so much trash on the roadside, so much trash at the beach. And in the span of a generation or so, I think it was the kids who finally got on their parents. And I've just been so impressed coming back after 35 years and seeing less trash.
That's true, actually,
So,
Mark. That's
yeah,
true.
yeah.
Very good.
And I'd like to add, actually, that I think that it speaks to a problem of connection, individual connections to the issue.
Yes.
And I think, you know, I'm going to move the conversation a little bit towards the huge elephant in the room, climate change, and talk about, this is a global phenomenon. We know how to fix this problem. We know that to stop the warming of the planet, all we need to do is to stop fossil fuel burning. And we have many strategies that enable us to do it. But what we're running up against is this problem with political will. He said, she said, they did or they didn't. It's such a complex system globally and politically to get to this outcome, that I think all of the messaging back is that it's potentially not doable. What happens if we don't do it? The planet is rising. We're seeing the impacts of climate change everywhere. New temperatures being added to the scales for Australia. We're seeing huge increases in the number of large storms that are hitting places across the planet. Killer storms. The planet is warmer than it's ever been. And coral reefs right now in the northern part of the Great Barrier Reef have turned bone white, because corals, when they hit temperatures that they cannot stand, turn white, and often most of the corals that turn white will die. So, people the reports in the news right now are that, the Great Barrier Reef is dying. And, over a third of the Great Barrier Reef is affected by higher than normal temperatures. And it's not just the mean temperature that we're seeing changes in. We're seeing these huge spikes up and down, and it's these high spikes that are actually causing problems. And bringing it back home is exactly what caused problems for us this past year and the year before. We had bleaching events here in Hawaii that were extremely extensive, and we're just now starting to be able to document what the implications of 2015's bleaching event has been. It was a very widespread event in Hawaii, and many reefs have suffered quite substantial death. So but the point that I want to make is everybody on the street realizes that the problem can be solved by stopping fossil fuel burning, but they recognize, I think, that apart from doing the things that we should all be doing, electric cars and changing out our light bulbs and putting solar on our houses, and Hawaii is hugely ahead of that game, this big problem seems to be getting worse and worse and worse, and it seems almost unmanageable. And I think what then happens is people disconnect from the environment. They stop caring because they realize nobody else cares, so why should I care? So I think that the scope of the problem is very overwhelming. The other issue, I think, is here in Hawaii, we have a lot of visitors, and sometimes visitors don't treat our environment as well as residents do. And so this balance of who owns and takes care of the place, I think, is something that is quite hard here, because local people, the residents, will take really good care of a place and then come and find a beach trashed by a group of tourists who've come through.
Sometimes the tourists come and find the beach trashed by the locals.
That's right. I mean, it's a he said, she said situation. It's, well, if you're going to trash the beach, then I'll just continue to trash the beach.
But on that notion, we had COP21.
Yes.
Everybody had expectations about COP21,
Yes.
thought it was going to really have a big effect on political will around the world. But, it got political. I mean, in the negative sense.
Yeah.
And, countries were protecting their own thing and their own industry and their own state of development. As a result, it became should instead of must. And the U.S. was responsible for that because they wanted to avoid having Congress approve the results of COP21. And if you said must, then Congress would have to approve it, and Congress would not approve it, which is just amazing in my mind. We in this country understand it best, perhaps, but we do things like that. So, question is, where are you ever going to find the political will here? This is a biblical test of the rationality of humankind, and we're not doing very well.
It is. And I've come to believe that the solution is that it has to be brought home. The issue has to be important to
Don't push
each
the microphone,
individual.
I know you're excited about this.
But each and every citizen must care, and that involves education. Not education that's rammed down the throat, but information that's presented in a way where it sinks in and is brought home. One perfect example for coral reefs: almost everyone in the United States has been touched directly or indirectly by cancer. I lost my grandmother to cancer, I lost my dad to cancer, everybody. And some of the best sources of new anti-cancer drugs are from coral reef organisms. But the word's not really out on that. So if we think about our loved ones at home, and that there are new medicines coming from coral reefs that we're losing more rapidly than we can discover, that helps bring it home.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we're only now finding out what happens with another degree or two of temperature. We didn't really know the incredible things that could happen. And then the chain reaction effect. One thing, has a reaction to that temperature, and then it affects all these other things, and that is ultimately going to affect humankind.
Yeah, if I could just add on to what Mark said, that's the whole reason why we've decided to do things differently this time. And I think we all come to the same conclusion: if we keep doing the same things the same ways, nothing's going to get better.
Yeah.
And so both what Ruth and Mark have been really focusing on is political will, personal responsibility. The scientific community has to do a better job of communicating, and that's why we decided to make this is a real departure, that when we raised the idea of trying to make bridging science to policy a main theme, there were some people who took a step back and say, but that's not what we usually do. And the answer was, yeah, and if we keep doing what we've been doing, we know the trajectory of reefs is continuing
Are
to
you
go down.
inviting politicians to
Yes,
the
we
program?
are.
You're
And
going to try to get the legislature down there and
we've
maybe
actually,
the judiciary as well?
we're focusing on that. We've decided to try to focus initially on the executive branch. We have 3 presidents that have already committed. The president of Palau, who's going to be our keynote speaker, His Excellency Tommy Remengesau. They just established 80% of their exclusive economic zone as marine protected area. That's a bold move in the right direction.
Yeah.
The president of the Federated States of Micronesia and the president of the Marshall Islands are all coming.
That's great.
We have people from the Caribbean as well. We're working on Honduras, Belize, and the Bahamas. And the idea there is it's the executive branch agencies that actually have the mandate to be able to put in where the science can be effective. Every month we're coming up with better information on sediment thresholds, temperature thresholds, pollution thresholds, and yet there's not a clean mechanism for being able to move this knowledge quickly into the field of regulation and overall legislation.
Are you going to
So
come
we're
up
focusing.
with things that are, model regulation, model legislation, action points for these politicians, political officials to undertake when they get home? Here's a list of 10 things you want to do. Start doing them.
Yes. So the Center for Ocean Solutions at Stanford University has been helping us as well. And we actually have a couple of lawyers. We reached out to the University of Hawaii Law School as well. Denise Antolini is a
She
wonderful...
was here yesterday, sitting in Mark's seat. Right there.
She's a top-notch lawyer, but she's also teaches the environmental law program. And part of what we're saying is, the science is not the limiting factor now. They're doing a gap analysis to find out if you look at overarching legislation, that really sets the table for then using regulation within an administrative framework. So very much the bridge from science to policy, we've reached out to economists to answer the why. Why should we care? Well, financially, Ruth said some very important statements there. And also the legal framework of how can we guide behavior, rewarding those behaviors that are sound and trying to stop the behaviors that we know are so damaging.
That was Judge Benjamin from the Supreme Court of Brazil, the High Court of Brazil, talking about the judicial side of things. It's about enforcement. I mean, granted that we have to believe that people are essentially good, and they do, and they want to survive individually and as a community. However, in order to really get them to do something is the rule of law. And it's environmental law.
Yeah.
And you have to bring the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary along. That was the justice's point yesterday.
I think, one of the things that's really fascinating to me is watching the younger generation come up. And I am seeing extraordinarily talented young people coming into the field of coral reef science who really want to be engaged in solving problems. They don't want to learn just because they're learning. They want to learn because they want to do something. And in my mind, that wave is also going to come from the opposite end and combine with this more informed political setting to actually change things quickly once the momentum builds. And I think that this, yes, it's cleaner than it used to be, reflects the beginning of that wave actually having an impact at a local scale. But one of the great things about this conference and our society is it's the International Coral Reef Symposium. It's the International Society for Reef Studies. We are communicating with people from all sectors, from many places simultaneously, and asking for a collaboration in how we move forward. Let's break the mold of academic competition. Let's think about how to make the best use of the resources that we have, and let's all complement and work together to move the momentum in whatever way we can personally act. And I think this conference is so important in setting the stage for that change in tone, really from the academic community, talking about solutions, talking about, yes, we've done science and we've talked to scientists. Now we have to not only translate our messages to broader audiences, but be willing to have the conversations so that we understand how to tweak our knowledge to best fit to advance the agendas of many other communities. And I think to me, it's just an amazing opportunity for us to host.
For Hawaii, for
it's
sure.
incredible.
We are the ones that should be doing it for sure.
Absolutely.
So when this is going to be June 19th to 24th at where? What's the venue?
At the Honolulu Convention Center.
At the
Hawaii
Convention Center. It'd be fabulous. Is the public invited?
Yeah, so we have 3 nights of programs that are open to the general public. We do expect between 2,500 and 2,700 delegates that are directly involved. We have a number of students and teachers and stakeholders that are involved as well. But Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, we're going to be having community open programs to hear from scientists, from fishers, from traditional leaders. And then Wednesday night, that Wednesday, we're actually going to have a celebration of coral reefs where we're trying to bring in local culture.
Great
We have several
idea.
halaus that are actually working on hula that are tied to corals and coral reefs. And so we really encourage the community. It will be posted on our website. The easiest thing to do is either Google.
What's your website?
So our website, there are 2 ways of getting to it. Just Google 13 ICRS, International Coral Reef Symposium, it'll pop up. The other way is through the Society's website, www.coralreefs.org, very simple. And either way you can get there. So we have a good presence on it as well. And what we're encouraging people to do is as we start to post these community events, if people could just indicate that they want to come so we know if it's going to be 300 people, 500 people, or 1,000.
It'll be 1,000, I'm telling you now.
We hope so. We're really, really hoping it will be.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming down. Mark Hickson, Ruth Gates, and Bob Richmond, thank you so much for being here, for doing your science, but going further than that, for doing this thing for the common good.
Thank you very much, Jenny.